Okay, welcome back. We just finished talking about views and how they're pretty doggone useful. And if you can remember this goofy little chart here, this comes in pretty handy. Next thing to talk about on page 369 is the programming part. And I'm going to skip over that and immediately go to something called functions on page 370. Okay, so functions are kind of sort of like views. There are different categories of functions. One that return rows and rows of data. Okay, it's called a table function. Okay, makes sense. Kind of sort of the same as a view. And there's another one called a scalar function. That's a math term. Don't get excited. Basically means is I take a bunch of data and I cram it down and give one answer. Okay, like I do a sum or an average or something like that, or it just produces one piece of information. Okay. So a scalar returns a single value and a table returns things that look like a table, right? Okay, good. There's actually one called an aggregate, but that would be making something like sum, the sum function. You can actually make a brand new one. I don't know. Maybe you want to have, mean, mode, and average kind of a thing. You want to do a mode. That kind of thing. We're not doing that. So we're only going to be using user-defined functions, UDFs, in two ways: those that produce tables and those that produce single values. That value could be a string, could be money, could be integer. Right? The data type is not all that relevant. Okay, kind of sort of makes sense. Good. All right. So you might think, well, what's the difference here in our scenario here? I've created a view, and it kind of sort of works. But here's something weird. Let's say, for example, I wanted to do this as a function, and the key feature that distinguishes between a function and a view is I can pass a parameter. What the heck does that mean? Pass a parameter to a function. I cannot pass a parameter to a view. So I'm going to pretend like I already have one. So just bear with me for a minute. I obviously don't. I'm going to say select asterisk from. So I'm going to call this F, right? Student info. And then I'm going to pass a parameter of 3 to this thing. Okay? That's what pass a parameter means. I'm actually taking some data and I'm sending the 3 to the function, and the function is going to use that 3 for something. Okay? That's what passing a parameter means. I cannot do that up here. Okay. All right, so I'm ready to create one. Are you? Okay, here we go. So creating one of these things is a little weird. I'm going to go ahead and say create function. That part's what you'd expect. F student info. Now, I almost always do this on separate lines, although I can see how kind of mirroring that. So I need an ID. I happen to know that this is going to end up being a student ID, but I'm just going to call it ID. So in a variable, because we're like kind of sort of like doing programming here, I'm going to use the @ sign and say ID and then give its data type. Okay, so I'm creating a function that's going to receive a numeric value, and I'm going to temporarily store it into a variable called ID. Okay, good. And then I need to tell what kind of function. Remember we talked about the table function and the aggregate, the scalar function. So I'm going to have to tell what it returns. So it returns a table. Okay, good. And then the rest of it starts kind of sort of like we did before. And then I'm going to say return and then the rest of the statement. So I'm going to copy and paste up here. All right. Okay. So now I need to do something different. I need to say we're active and student ID is equal to this variable ID @ ID. Okay, so I'm creating a function, and what happens if I pass it a 1, it's going to do the where clause for me. Actually, I'm going to take this part out just to make it a little less complicated. Oh, it's student ID. Ha ha ha. Okay, kind of makes sense. So if I pass it a 3, it's going to give me data on student number 3. If I pass it a 1, it's going to give me a, right? Okay. So let me build this guy. All right, and then how do you use this guy? Because it returns a table, it's going to be the exact same thing we did before, where I'm going to go say select asterisk from F student info, and then pass it a 1. Okay, and that will give me the data for student number 1. If I change this to a 2, there is no 2. I go okay, kind of sort of makes sense. Okay, so when you tell it to return a table and it doesn't return something, there's some extra things we could have done in there, but not without doing some programming. So I'm not gonna mess with that at all. I'm just gonna pretend like you guys don't ever make mistakes. You don't ever ask for students that don't exist. How's that for a good answer? Woohoo! Okay. So that's the way that works. So one more time. What is the distinction between a view and a function? A function, I can pass a parameter to it. I can pass lots of things. I can pass multiple parameters. For example, let's say if I said int, comma, and then, I don't know, act as a bit. And then I could go here and say, and active is equal to act, like that. And so here I would have to pass it 2 things like that. Oh, by the way, how do you edit a function? What happens if I just hit execute here? Since this already has a function by that name. There's no practical way to edit. You just have to whack them and start over. Okay, so where the heck are they? Well, actually they're weird. It's down here in programmability. And then functions, and then table valued functions. Okay, I'm going to whack this guy. I'm going to go in here and delete him. Boink. And then I'm going to do this and over again. So now that I have an altered version of that. Okay, and then I'm going to call up this guy and ta-da! Okay, is this making sense? Okay, so I created a view that passed 2 parameters to it. I happen to use both of them in a where clause. That's a very common thing to do. You could actually have some other places to do it, but it's very unusual. Okay, so one more time. I created a function and I used it as if it was a table because it was one of those table valued functions. Okay, now we're going to do one that's called a scalar valued function. Now it's a little bit more complicated and has a little bit more moving parts. So I'm going to say create function, and I'm going to call this one F, how about num phones. And I'm going to pass to it the student ID. All I want to know is how many phones you have. That's it. I don't need to know what they are. I just want to count them. How many phones there are. That's the only thing I want to know. Okay, so far so good. So in this time, it's not going to return a table, is it? It's going to return a particular data type, and the most appropriate data type, I would think, would be an int, because returning an integer, right? Okay, and then I'm gonna declare a variable. Okay, I know we're kind of getting off into. So that's supposed to be an int. I'm going to call it, I don't know, num. And I tell it the data type. Okay, so far so good. Now here's where one of those situations where you might actually want to use the semicolon. It's not absolutely required, but it kind of sort of makes sense. So I'm returns plural, returns. Just like up here it said returns table. Returns an integer. I'm declaring a variable called num. And then I'm going to do a normal SQL statement. You know, select, and I'm going to say count. from student phone where student ID is equal to @ID. Now, we're not quite done because this thing has to return something, and this just executes the query but doesn't actually do anything. So I'm going to do something kind of funky here that we haven't never done before. And I'm going to say num equals like that. So I'm kind of making it look like it's a like a programming language here. Okay, so the num equals it just runs the query and stores it into the thing. That's all it does. And then when I'm done, what I need to be able to do is return the correct answer. Okay? Now I will tell you, just because I'm a little crazy, sometimes I call this answer. It just kind of makes sense to me. Because I'm doing something, I'm doing some sort of math or whatever it is I'm doing, and then I return the answer. It just makes sense to me from an English perspective. Okay, kind of makes sense. And then at this part, oops, I forgot something. Doggone it. I need to put a begin in here. Okay. All right, so this one is a little bit more complicated. I create a function. I do have to give it the variable name and the data type. Okay, so far so good. Data type is going to be integer. I'm telling it that it returns an integer as, man, I messed up a lot of stuff here. Okay. Phew. Okay, so I'm creating a function that's going to go in there and I pass it a single parameter. It's going to return an integer as, and then there's a declare, a begin and an end, and that's where I declare my variable. And inside the begin and end is where I typically use a semicolon. So I'm going to try this guy. And ta-da! It did it. Now, this one is weird. Unlike the previous examples with the view and the table valued function, this guy returns a single value, so it's not going to... This won't work that well. I could say select num phones 1. Okay, I could do that. Okay. But it's gonna... Oh, by the way, this is something that's kind of odd. Here's how you would normally run it. Okay. Normally, instead of hard coding, you would say something like, I want to do student ID, first name, last name, from student, right? A normal command. And then I'm going to go here and I'm going to tack my guy on. So my brand new function that I created isn't being used as a table at all. It's being used as on the select statement. Okay, now you might think that if I just said num phones and I have to pass it a parameter, I don't have to pass it a constant like 1 and 2 like we did before. I could pass it the student ID. Ooh. Okay. Now, for some reason that it's difficult for me to understand, it doesn't actually recognize this guy, and so I actually have to type in something weird. I've typed in dbo dot. Okay, look, I don't understand it. It's just one of those things. To me, once I created that function, it should be happy. It should just make me, do everything without me having to go do this stuff. So I'm going to do this and ta-da! So Bob Smith has 2 phones and Fred Jones has 1 phone. Okay. Kind of making sense? I hope so, because we're coming up on the end of this little video. See you in just a second.